when mothers have these deformed babies because of inbreeding, and like we talked about, many of the mothers will have more than one child, have several children like this. Many times the problem is blamed on her.
Right. Maybe she didn't eat right. Maybe she didn't obey her husband. Maybe she did something that her husband wants her to feel guilty for. So if it's her fault, then
then she gets the blame for it?
She gets the blame for it.
Even though it's genetic, they won't admit it. They'll give her the blame.
But if she was worthy in God's eyes, it wouldn't have happened. And that's what they believe. They believe that God is guiding them, and this is God's way of rewarding or punishing them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so they take absolutely no consequence, personal consequence, for the genetic inbreeding that all medical personnel would know is the reason for this disastrous results.
Primary Children's has several of these babies every year, and Utah, the state of Utah, is paying a fortune to take care of these babies.
I met a woman one time, I won't say who she was or what store we were in, but she recognized me from the show. She was a nurse up at the university hospital, and she said, you know, I see these babies all the time. I see the mothers, they look so sad, they look so hopeless, and you ought to see some of the sad children, the sad cases that we see for those children. So it's going on, but they just keep it so
several every
quiet.
Year.
Mm-hmm. And they're still inbreeding. They're not inbreeding maybe as closely and harshly as they were.
Yes, they are.
They still are? I heard that they weren't, so but I didn't know for sure.
Well, of course they say they're not, but they are.
Mm-hmm. Polygamous mothers, especially in this particular group, have no financial support from their husband. They are required to support themselves. And if they have 3 kids or 13 kids or 15 kids, they are still required. They're still required to support themselves and work every single day.
They go to work, they provide for the children, they pay their monthly bills, they pay their rent, electricity.
And their husband never helps them at all with this. So they have a special needs child, or more than one maybe, and pretty soon this mother is an emotional wreck. She becomes a special needs person herself. And so we've got failure dealing with more failure just because of the emotional stress and the burden that they're on. It's an emotional disaster.
Right, and there's a lot of major depression in the Kingston group. There's a lot of schizophrenia in the Kingston group. And a lot of these mothers that fail, the children that live through this and end up leaving, become suicidal. There was even a suicide pact in the group recently, and I hear that there were 8 people involved.
Yeah, I'd heard about that too, and I've received emails from young people in the group, teenagers in the group, where their only hope was to die.
Right.
They just didn't
Very
have any
common
hope.
for people that grow up like this to be suicidal.
Yeah, it's sad. It's very sad. I don't know how many of the mothers deal with it either, not to mention the children. In February of this year, February and March, we had a guest, John Llewellyn. I think you know who he is. And he wrote a book entitled The Polygamy Rape of Rachel Strong. And I want to quote from this book on page 22. It was written in 2006. I think you'll find this very familiar, but I think our viewers will find this interesting. He said in this book, independent investigators obtained birth certificates of over 600 children that were fathered by 7 men in the Kingston group. It is common knowledge that the Kingston group practices incest to preserve its bloodlines. How many of these 600 children from just these 7 men do you suppose were conceived through incest? A huge percentage of them would have been. He said these birth certificates were turned over to the Attorney General, but in accordance with the policy of so many polygamists, where lying for the Lord is a star in your crown. Many polygamist mothers lie about who the father is of their children's on their children's birth certificate.
Right.
And of course, I personally know that happened in my life. We never were able to say who our real father was. We had a fake father. I'm sure you did too.
My birth certificate doesn't have my real father's name. It has a name, but it's not a real person.
And so if you had married a half sibling, a half brother, and you'd had the same father, but both of your birth
legally-
certificates would show a totally different
Right.
father for both of you.
Right.
A fake father that didn't exist. And yet
Exactly.
you're involved in the incest. Of course, sibling marriages are illegal. They are and in Utah,
Anywhere.
cousin marriages
Anywhere.
are. That's right. Now, he said that there were 600 children born of these 7 men. How many birth defects do you think would come from these 600, at least that had the genetic recessive genes that would happen with close relative inbreeding? On another thought wave, I thought that I would throw this out to our viewers and perhaps we can get some responses. Let's look at the math here. These 7 men in 2006 had 600 children. We're in the 3rd generation past the first bunch of kids that these 7 men have had. Okay, so let's take a look at the 2nd generation and then the 3rd generation just to talk about numbers. How many children would the 1st generation have from these 600 kids? Now, these 7 men have had hundreds of kids since then. Many, many more hundreds have been born since 2006. That was 4 years ago. So if any viewer would like to tackle the math for us, tell us how many children would come from the first 600, then their children in the 2nd generation, and then all of those children in the 3rd generation, just to get a clear idea of the dangerous mushrooming consequences of polygamy in this culture. It would be interesting. I'll share it on the air if somebody wants to do the math and send it our way to tv@aboutpolygamy.com. I think it would be very interesting to look at those figures. Okay, we have some calls. We have an off-the-air comment. Dale from Provo, 150 people in one family has FSH, muscular dystrophy. Utah has the highest rate of muscular dystrophy. It would be interesting to know how many of them are in polygamy groups, if the studies have been done. Have you heard about any of that?
No, I haven't.
Whether like maybe fumarase deficiency, because most of those are in the FLDS.
In the FLDS.
Polygamy group. Okay, thank you for that information. To our viewer who gave us that information, be interesting to know just a little bit more detail about that figure. Okay, line 1, we have Marcia from Ogden calling. Hello, Marcia.
Yes, Doris, I have been very interested in your guests and your comments tonight, and I want to pass along the statement that I wanted to ask you the question, if you could kind of, if you happen to know feedback on it. My mother's half-sister, when she got married, they had a child. They only had one child. When we met this young man, he was about 14 or 15. He had MD, and she was attempting to look up in her ancestry, during her genealogy, this kind of thing. I'm not sure if she was Mormon, but she strongly, very strongly felt that her son's MD came through polygamy and through the Mormon polygamist lines. And your comments tonight made me kind of think about this again. Mm-hmm. However, the church would not let her look at any records, which I thought was very odd. Can you address this? And you just alluded to the fact that maybe since Utah has the highest cases of MD, this might be the case. And I'll hang up and let you answer.
Okay, Marcia, thank you for your call. Of course, we don't know the answer to that because the highest rate of MD was from a caller that had called and left the message, and we just got that information from one of our viewers. It would be interesting to get what the figures are related to the inbreeding, and I find it very interesting that the LDS Church wouldn't let her look at the records.
They're usually very eager
Yeah,
to look up family
they're
records.
big genealogy fans. Why would they shut this one off?
Right.
And not let her see him? I don't know if she could get a court order, if she even wants to go that far to get the records. But if she thinks that there's some inbreeding going on, she should know for future generations. She should know whether, and I don't know if she can get that or not, but she should try. I would try if I were her. Anyway, I hope that helps to answer your question, Marcia, and we do thank you for your call. We have line 2, Tate from Heber City calling. Hello, Tate.
Is this Doris?
Yes, this is Doris. You're on the air.
Alrighty then. Okay. My question was, well, as you were talking earlier about just the horrible thing modern day polygamy is, was early Mormon polygamy, well, I haven't exactly heard that early Mormon polygamy wasn't nearly as bad.
Well, what's the standard for nearly as bad? I read at the beginning of the show, as I was leading into present-day polygamy, I read early Mormon polygamy policy, preaching, and practice was incest.
Well, yes, but it wasn't sexual abuse or anything. It was more respectable and not so just cruel and harsh as it is today.
What's respectable? Tell me where you get the word respectable when you're dealing with polygamy and when you're dealing with the underage marriages and when you're dealing with incest. There's nothing.
Well, you respect your wife. I mean, you've got to have much love for your wife.
Well, the early Mormon polygamy and present-day polygamy, and this is not a blanket statement because there are some people who do live polygamy in a much saner manner than others. But if you've watched this show very often, I've gone into a lot of early Mormon polygamy incidents where there was no love between the man and his many, many wives. It was just a matter of grabbing wives and living polygamy so that you could become a god when you died. Men didn't support their wives, just like many of them don't today. Many of them do support their wives today. But, you can't take something that God has said not to do and call it respectable. It just can't be.
Well, according to more of the preachings was that polygamy was commanded to bring up the Mormon generation. I mean, both sides of my family, I have polygamy on both sides. Without polygamy, I would not be here.
Well, without polygamy, I wouldn't be here either based on what we're thinking, but God has a way of letting humans procreate and without polygamy. So we very may easily have been here. We just don't know who our parents would have been. But that still isn't the point. Mormons practice polygamy against biblical commands. Joseph Smith claimed he received a command from God.
Joseph Smith was commanded to do it. I mean, it wasn't exactly like, oh, let's be polygamous, but
well, actually it was.
So it was more of like a calling. It was only 20% or more or less that practiced polygamy.
Well, those figures can be easily disputed as well. I think you've picked up on some of the propaganda that the Mormon Church has put out. You need to dig into actual history that's not Mormon Cloroxed, but get into history where you really can get into the depths of the truths of early Mormon polygamy. It might shock you.
Oh, no, my sources come from an anti-biased non-Mormon. Mm-hmm. He's a history teacher at Rocky Mountain Middle School. He is not Mormon. He's Catholic, actually. But he teaches U.S. history or Utah history, so they're not biased at all.
Okay. Well, I don't know what history you were reading, so I can't really say, but early Mormon polygamy was just as awful. In fact, it was probably worse because they were in pioneer days and they didn't have the amenities of life. Do you have anything you'd like to say here?
Yeah, I think if you go back to journals and letters that were written at the time, early Mormon history was probably worse than it is today.
I think so. I think from what I've been reading, it was worse. But anyway, we do appreciate your call, and we hope that you'll just look in all the history and find truth outside of what the Mormons teach.
All right. All right, goodbye.
Bye. Clotilde from Taylorsville. Hello, Clotilde. Do I say that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Hi, I was wondering, or my question is for Connie. I was wondering if she's a first generation.
I am a first generation. My mother married into the Kingstons. My father was the one that started the inbreeding. So my mother was not a Kingston, but all of her children that have stayed in the Kingston group have continued with the inbreeding.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you, Connie and Doris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Connie, we see these things and we're closer to them than our viewers are, and I'm sure many of them are appalled at some of the things they've heard. And we've just skimmed the top. We haven't gone underneath and pulled out some of the ugly, hideous things that's gone on, and the lying and the deception. But we also know that many of the children are born and raised believing that this is the way to do it, that this is godly, that this is okay, that this is the right thing to do despite what the public says, despite the laws of the land. It's still the right thing to do. But we know it isn't. What do we do? How do we educate them? How do we get to the point to where they would stop and listen?
This is really difficult because it's a closed community. They have their own private schools, and apparently with a private school, the teachers don't have to be accredited. So I know that some of the teachers that are teaching high school are only less than 18, 16 and 17. The Kingstons talk about the high rate of college educated people they have. But these college educations, most of them are over the internet.
So they don't even...
You don't even know if they're doing their own homework.
You don't even... And they're not out in public. They're not able to interact with other people that think differently.
Right. With the close community, they only have contact with family members that believe the way they do. Like I said, my brothers and sisters wouldn't want their children to know me because I have a different opinion than them.
Mm-hmm. And so again, we have to say brainwashing, and we have to say there is no free agency.
But
their free agency is based on what they want them to have, and that's all.
They believe and they teach that you have free agency, and that free agency is either to do what's right or do what's wrong. That's your free agency. Do what I say or disobey me.
Okay, that's true. I know, I was raised in it. It's not a pretty picture sometimes. Let's see if it's line 1 is ready with Lisa. Hello, Lisa?
Yes.
Yes, you are on the air.
Okay.
What's your question?
My question is, I was just wondering if, hi Connie, hi Doris.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
If so many of, I know that Connie had said that quite a few of the women in the FLDS are on antidepressants, they must not be happy living the culture or the lifestyle. And if they're not, I'm just curious, is it really hard for them to leave?
No, we didn't say that they were on antidepressants. They're depressed, they have serious depression, but they also are not receiving medical care. And they probably have a very low percentage of women that take antidepressants. It's very hard for them to leave because they have no contacts on the outside. This is not only their family and their culture, but all of their friends. They don't even know how to talk to people on the outside. They've never had a job on the outside. They've never applied for a job.
They wouldn't be able to, and they would risk losing their membership in the group if they got an outside job.
They wouldn't know how to find an apartment on their own because they've been given a place to live, a place to work, a car. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to obtain these things on their own.
Right.
Everything is regulated by the group, and so they have group think and they have group everything. The group is their life. They'd be lost outside of it. But that's what our ministry wants to do. Our organization wants to help those who are sick and tired of being manipulated and lied to and maybe they just know there's something not quite right and they'd like to go out on their own. We're here to help them, not to try and say, come on, leave against their will, but if they're ready to leave, we'll help anybody out there who's watching the show and would really like to have a chance at life. We'll help them.
That's great. Well, I mean, if there's any way that I know that some of us, out here who are watching can help, maybe you can let us know either by donating money or time or whatever we could to just help out.
Well, you could go onto our webpage, childrenrefuge.org, and there is a contact page and information about our organization that you might want to interact with at that point.
Okay. Sounds great. I'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Okay, we have line 3, Harold in North Ogden. Hello, Harold.
Yes, hello there.
Yes, you're on the
You're
air.
looking good tonight.
Pardon me?
I say you girls look good tonight. And I'm just going to make a comment quick.
Okay.
Excuse me, and that thank Connie Rugg there, and it takes a lot of courage for her to come on the air and talk about her life, and
Thank
so
you, Harold.
that's appreciated. I was just going to say that I come from an LDS background, and that though mostly inactive my whole life, but I come from a polygamy background. I think my great-grandfather or great-grandmother 4 times removed was where we come from. And I'm just going to say that, I thought I knew what polygamy was. In the last couple of years, I've looked a lot harder at it and was surprised, at exactly what went on in the earlier Mormon history with polygamy and so on and so forth. And then I was aware of these fringe groups, but really didn't pay too much attention with it and stuff like that. And so this subject that you're on tonight is really just disturbing. I just more of a comment that for the LDS people, I mean, they're just like that one caller, was he from Heber City, and he wants to fight it and deny these things and this historical facts to the truth, whatever the truth may be, stands on its own and it'll withstand all scrutiny, investigation, and rigor.
That's right.
And that if they would, open their eyes a little bit and go back in the historical records that we have so much that are so available these days through UTLM.org and etc. And see what really the early church was about and so on and so forth, and especially in the very beginnings and so on and so forth. And and just open their minds and see what history says about it there, and make a judgment instead of being just following through their the whole doctrine. It's just blind and without and look at the contradictions in the doctrines as time has went on. So
well, Harold,
that's all
thank
I
you.
have to say.
Thank you, Harold.
And that's very good advice. We hope that there's some people who listen to you who will do what you recommended.
Okay, great, girls.
Okay, thank you. Good night. And again, it's not only we're looking at the early Mormon history and how it isn't squeaky clean like they would like them to see, but let's take a look at the Bible. I mean, they are saying that God said, thus saith the Lord, do this. Abraham did this, Jacob did this, David did this, so it's okay for us to do it. But they're not even reading the Bible for all it's worth. They're just making judgments based on what somebody told them it means rather than getting in there and studying it off for themselves.
That's like saying because Cain killed his brother, it's okay for me to kill my brother.
Yeah, it's in the Bible. Exactly. Line 2, we have Jean in Salt Lake City. Hello, Jean.
Yes. My grandmother, my mother's mother, and my grandfather were born right down here in Provo back in the 1800s. And Brigham Young sent them over to Heber to start up the Mormon wards over there. Now, my mother was a Mormon until she was about 18, and then they left the church. My great-grandmother Smith, my great-grandmother, she had 13 kids, and the boys became polygamists. They married their sisters. They married their little nieces. And we've got retardation all through our family. My mother had a retarded brother. Her brother had a retarded sister. I've got a retarded son from that, and I've never been a Mormon.
But it follows
and I've
through.
had to put up with it all this time. I've got a granddaughter that has a little girl that has 7 years old. She's retarded. I've got cousins up in Berkeley, a little 5-year-old. He's retarded. My other grandson in San Francisco, they're expecting a baby in the 14th of this month. And I'm scared to death that child might be retarded. And we've gone through hell because of those dirty, rotten polygamists over there.
That's right.
I've never been a Mormon, and God did not give Joseph Smith a revelation.
That's right.
He did not. He got it from the devil.
He sure never got it from
the
God.
devil. It's ruined my life, my whole family.
And it's ruined many people's lives, Jean. It really has.
And that's
it
what the
hurts.
Kingstons are facing for the next 100 generations.
Yep,
Well, I
because the
think our
genes are there.
government should step in and absolutely ban it.
Well, people need to speak to the government because it's supposed to be a government of the people and by the people. We need to speak to them.
And it's
not a
costing the
religion.
people of Utah a
Not a
fortune.
religion.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jean. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we're just a couple of minutes now towards the end of the show, so we're going to have to close down. If there's anyone on the phone waiting to call, you can email us tv@aboutpolygamy.com. And Connie, I want to thank you so very much for coming and sharing what you did. And
Thank you, Doris.
We pray that you'll be blessed and that many people will be blessed by what you said. My closing comments are going to be based on the law tonight. If you're using the law as a way to earn salvation or earn your way into heaven, you're doing it all wrong, because the law was given not to take us to glory, but to show disobedient and ungodly sinners just how sinful we are. In 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 9, it says that the law was not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and the disobedient. The law was made for the ungodly people and for sinners. So if you're using the law as a stepping stone to perfection, you are merely proving and admitting that you're an ungodly sinner, and that because that's who the law was made for. Now, Galatians tells us that the law was given as a tutor, as a teacher, to show us how badly we need a Savior and to lead us to Jesus. And once a person realizes that the law is a harsh and unforgiving judge of ungodly sinners, we quickly realize how desperately we need grace. And of course, grace by definition disqualifies any kind of works at all. Many people try to earn eternal glory by obeying a set of laws. That's what the polygamist groups do. But the law cannot get us there. The 10 Commandments is not a ladder where you work step by step, rung by rung, until you get to the top after you've been perfected and think that you've reached the goal. You haven't. The law was not made for that purpose. You need Jesus to carry you into heaven, not a ladder to climb there. Based on Psalm 119, I will choose the truth. And we hope and we pray that our viewers also will search it out and choose the truth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.